They say the mind is a mirror, but most of us never stop long enough to see what's truly reflected. We race, we reach, we regret, and in the blur between what was and what might be, we forget this. The present moment is the only place where the soul is alive. Not in the past, where ghosts of mistakes whisper endlessly. Not in the future, where fantasies of control seduce us into worry. Only here, only now, only in this breath. But the modern world teaches noise. It feeds the mind, but starves the spirit. It sharpens intellect, dulls intuition, and slowly, like rain on stone, it carves anxious patterns into our brains, until we forget that peace was once our native language. We are not broken. We are just distracted. There is a silence deeper than sleep, a stillness beneath every storm. It's not something you acquire, it's something you remember. And mindfulness is the remembering, not a technique, not a hack. It is the art of coming home to the one place you've abandoned yourself. No mantras, no effort, no achievement, only awareness, pure and soft, fierce and quiet. So what happens when you bring awareness to the present moment and keep it there, not just for 1 minute, but again and again and again? 21 days of devotion, 21 days of inner listening, 21 days of choosing breath over thought, stillness over reaction, presence over projection. The brain begins to soften, then it rewires. Like a forest burned by years of reactivity, new neural shoots begin to rise. Not because you forced them, but because you finally stopped feeding the fire. Science calls it neuroplasticity. The Buddha called it liberation. Both agree, what you repeatedly hold in your awareness, you become. Let that sink in. If you rehearse fear, you become anxiety. If you worship speed, you become exhaustion. If you practice silence, you become clarity. For 21 days you sit, you breathe, you feel. At first it hurts because awareness illuminates the noise you've used to survive. The mind rebels. The body fidgets. The ego whispers, "This is pointless." But that's just the old brain dying. The part trained in addiction to stimulus. The part that thinks stillness is death. The part that fears emptiness, not knowing it's actually the womb of all things. And then something shifts. You no longer chase thoughts. You witness them. You no longer fear silence. You are the silence. The space between inhale and exhale becomes sacred. The pauses in your speech become prayer. You no longer ask the world to slow down because you have slowed within. And when the mind begins to follow breath instead of fear, the brain begins to rewire. The amygdala, once swollen with stress, begins to quiet. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of attention and wisdom, begins to shine. Old trauma pathways dim. New networks of compassion and presence light up like lanterns in the dark. But this isn't a science lesson. This is sacred territory. You are not just changing your brain. You are undoing lifetimes of forgetting. You are remembering how to be here, to be still, to be aware without needing to fix, fight, or flee. And in that awareness, something holy awakens. Not outside you, within. Stillness is not the absence of life. It is the birthplace of all things sacred. The world teaches you to move faster. Mindfulness teaches you to see. And once you begin to see, truly see, the illusions start to dissolve. The illusion that you are your thoughts. The illusion that peace is something to earn. The illusion that doing more makes you more. Every day, you become a little less tangled, a little less hurried, a little more aware of the subtle war you've been waging inside, between the noise and the knowing. In the early days of mindfulness, the noise gets louder. It screams for your attention, like a child used to getting its way. It tells you that you're wasting time. It throws memories at you, deadlines, fears, urges. It convinces you that being here is not enough. And yet, you remain, not fighting it, not fixing it, simply witnessing. Awareness becomes your sword and silence your shield. This is not suppression. This is liberation through allowing. Every time you notice a thought and let it go without following, a chain snaps. Every time you sit with a feeling without judging, a wound begins to breathe. And day by day, moment by moment, something extraordinary happens. You stop reacting and you start responding. Reaction is the habit of the old mind. Impulsive, conditioned, blind. Response is the offering of the awakened mind. Clear, spacious, free. The more you observe, the less you are consumed. The more you allow, the less you resist. And resistance is what tightens the knots in your brain. Resistance is what fuels the circuitry of fear, shame, self-doubt. But when you stop resisting, when you breathe through the storm instead of becoming the storm, you create space. And space is where healing lives. Day by day, mindfulness is pruning the garden of your mind. It's cutting back the overgrowth of worry, pulling out the weeds of old identity, watering the soil with attention and presence. Until one day, without fanfare, without epiphany, you realize you are no longer the same. The compulsive need to check, to control, to fix has softened. The inner commentary, once constant, now feels distant, like a radio in another room, and in its place, space. Not emptiness, not boredom, but a sacred spaciousness, a fertile stillness. This space is where creativity is born, where compassion takes root, where choice returns. Because when the mind is quiet, the heart can finally speak. And the heart does not speak in arguments or algorithms. It speaks in knowing, in presence, in silence. Buddhist masters call it beginner's mind, the ability to meet each moment without labels, without the residue of memory. It is not forgetting, it is forgiving, letting each moment arrive clean, without dragging yesterday's story behind it. And in this freshness, the brain begins to light up differently. You become less defined by past experience and more open to direct experience. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" And you begin asking, "What's here right now?" That simple question, asked again and again with sincerity, rewires everything. Because the brain loves repetition. And every time you choose presence over panic, breath over blame, stillness over stimulation, you are casting votes. Votes for the kind of mind you want to live inside. Votes for the kind of world you want to perceive. And over 21 days, those votes add up. Not in a dramatic fireworks display, but like sunrise creeping over a mountain, quiet, golden, inevitable. You will still feel fear, but you will not become it. You will still have thoughts, but they will no longer own you. You will still be in the world, but no longer of it. Because something ancient has begun to stir inside you. Not a new personality, not a new identity, but an old friend, long forgotten. The awareness that watches all things, but clings to nothing. There comes a point on the path, not marked by date or ritual, where the scaffolding of who you thought you were begins to crack. It doesn't happen in a thunderclap. It happens in the pause between thoughts, in the spaces you used to rush past, in the breath you finally let yourself feel. You look in the mirror and ask, if I am not these thoughts, not these roles, not this story, then who am I? And the answer doesn't come in words. It comes in the sound of your own stillness, finally loud enough to hear. This is the beginning of ego's unraveling. Not its destruction, but its disarming. Because ego is not your enemy. It is a frightened child, built of stories and scars, whose only purpose is to protect what it believes you are. But mindfulness doesn't fight the ego. It holds it gently, like a mother holding a trembling child. And in the presence of that unshaken attention, the ego begins to loosen its grip. It begins to trust something deeper than control, awareness itself. You are never the voice in your head. You are the awareness that hears it, without judgment, without attachment. And when you stop clinging to identity, your brain stops clinging to the neural pathways that obsess over self-image, over status, over comparison. They begin to fade from disuse, and something ancient takes their place. Call it emptiness, call it presence, call it Buddha nature. It is not a thing. It is not a goal. It is the space in which all things arise, and yet it is untouched by them. This is not spiritual theory. This is rewiring. Every time you choose not to defend yourself, not to prove your worth, not to rehearse your story, you are teaching the brain to unlearn the illusion of a fixed self. Because the self you defend is not the self you are. The one you are, the true self, doesn't need defending. It cannot be wounded. It cannot be improved. It can only be remembered. And for the first time, you begin to remember. You are not the storm. You are the sky. It passes through. You are not the craving. You are the stillness that watches it rise and fall. You are not the thought. You are the space before it, and the silence after. This is not philosophy. This is the direct experience of awareness, untainted, unscripted, unowned. At this stage in the journey, the world begins to appear different. Not because it changed, but because you did. The colors seem deeper. The silence seems sweeter. The rush of life, once overwhelming, now feels like wind moving through trees. You no longer grip life. You let it flow, and your brain, sensing that you no longer need constant defense, reallocates its energy from fear to focus, from control to compassion, from storytelling to stillness. There is less doing, but more being, and from that being arises a clarity that is fierce, but kind. You start seeing the games the mind plays, not with disdain, but with understanding. You no longer believe every thought. You observe them like clouds, some dark, some light, but none permanent. And in that observation, you touch the great truth. Nothing that comes and goes is you, not the emotion, not the memory, not the pain. In 21 days, the brain learns how to let go, not because it was forced, but because the awareness beneath it gave permission. You're no longer reacting to life. You are in conversation with it. And mindfulness becomes less a practice and more a way of seeing, of being, of loving, not with grasping but with presence. You realize now, you don't need to add more to yourself. You need to remove what was never you to begin with. And as you strip away the noise, the effort, the resistance, what's left is simple. Stillness, clarity, truth. Not something new, but something ancient, and always present beneath the waves of becoming. When the mind quiets, you begin to hear something deeper than thought. A current flowing beneath the chaos, so steady, so silent, that you wonder how you ever missed it. It is not peace that was absent. It was attention. And as you keep coming back to the breath, to the body, to now, a new flavor of awareness begins to rise. Not bliss, not euphoria, something deeper. Equanimity. Not the absence of emotion, but the presence of vastness. You still feel, you still care, but you are no longer possessed by what arises. Anger still visits, but it no longer builds a temple in your chest. Sadness still whispers, but it no longer defines your day. Fear knocks, but it no longer owns the house. You start to see that emotions are just weather systems passing through the sky of awareness. And when the sky stops believing it is the storm, the whole world becomes lighter. This is the fruit of mindfulness. Not a perfect life, but an undisturbed center. The waves still come, but you become the ocean. And your brain, once addicted to reactivity, now begins to prefer stillness. It rewires for pause, for patience, for presence. Neuroplasticity isn't just the reshaping of neurons, it's the redefinition of identity. You are no longer the puppet of your moods. You are the witness of the whole theater. You see anger, and you breathe. You see craving, and you smile. Not to suppress it, but to meet it without flinching. This is not detachment. This is intimacy without entanglement. The Buddha called it apek, the holy, spacious balance of the heart. Modern science calls it emotional regulation. You will call it coming home to yourself. And from that home, something sacred grows, quietly, without announcement. Compassion, not as an idea, but as your resting state. When your suffering lessens, your heart softens for those still trapped in theirs. You no longer judge their reactivity because you remember your own. You no longer attack the angry because you recognize pain beneath the fire. You no longer look at others as them because the illusion of separation has begun to dissolve. This is not sainthood. This is sanity. The brain, when returned to presence, remembers how to love without fear. It remembers that to be alive is not to win, but to awake. And as love returns, fear begins to die. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being seen. Fear of silence. Fear of death. These shadows, once so loud, begin to fade in the presence of one truth. What you are cannot be destroyed. You touch this truth not in thought, but in the breathless stillness between breaths, where time disappears, where the self thins out, where only awareness remains, infinite, unmoved. Turn, and for a moment, perhaps a second, perhaps an eternity, you see it. That beneath the shifting mind, beneath the temporary self, there is something that was never born and cannot die. This is the secret the Buddha pointed to. Not in temple, not in chants, but in the simplicity of presence. The end of suffering is not in escaping life. It is in meeting it, completely, nakedly, presently, and no longer resisting it. And 21 days of mindfulness has prepared you for this meeting. You no longer run. You no longer fix. You see. And in that seeing, a new kind of death occurs. Not the end of life, but the end of illusion. And what remains? Not a new identity, not a perfect mind. Just this breath, this moment, this naked, sacred, and you, aware of it all, yet needing nothing from it. Not grasping, not pushing, simply be. By now something is different. But it's not that the world has changed. It's that you're no longer fighting it. Not because you gave up, but because you woke up. You stopped insisting that things be other than they are. You stopped arguing with the moment. And in that surrender, the old self fell away like ash. Not a collapse, a soft letting go. The masks you wore, the names you clung to, the voice in your head that whispered more. They've grown quiet. And behind the silence, you found a presence that never speaks, but always knows. This is not the end of your journey, but it is the beginning of your return. Return to the truth that was waiting beneath every breath. Return to the ground beneath your compulsions. Return to the sacred stillness within you that was never born and can never die. You are not becoming something new. You are remembering what you already are. And your brain, it has changed profoundly, not into something extraordinary, but into something clear. It is no longer cluttered with fear-based patterns. It no longer runs from stillness. It no longer mistakes busyness for worth. Instead, it has learned the rhythm of enough. The nervous system, once frayed, now rests in the cadence of the breath. The attention, once scattered, now flows like water toward the now. The voice in the head, once loud, now whispers only when needed. And you, for the first time, are not trying to control it. You are simply aware. And that awareness, it is love. in its purest form. Not love as emotion, not love as possession, but love as presence. The kind of love that sees without needing to fix, that holds without needing to grasp, that is, without explanation. You begin to walk differently in the world, not above it, not separate from it, but not lost in it either. Like a tree rooted in stillness, while winds pass through its branches, you listen deeper, you speak with less noise, you meet pain with compassion, not resistance. You meet joy with humility, not clinging. And even when storms rise, because they always do, you remain present, soft, awake. The brain, the body, the spirit, no longer pulling in different directions. There is harmony now. There is rhythm. There is peace, not because suffering ended, but because your resistance to it did. This is the true transformation, not the end of thought, not the erasure of emotion, but the integration of all things into stillness. You may not have noticed the moment it happened, but something has changed forever. You no longer live in reaction, you live in revelation. Every breath a return, every step a remembering, every silence a sermon. This is what happens after 21 days of mindfulness. You don't become someone new. You meet who you were before the world told you who to be. You don't transcend the mind. You teach it to bow to the present. You don't escape life. You fall so deeply into it that even death becomes just another wave on the ocean of awareness. And at the center of it all, beneath the neurons, beneath the breath, beneath the ego, is this moment, pure, vast, unborn. You sit in it now, not chasing, not seeking, just listening. And in that stillness, at the very end of your journey, you realize you've been home all along.